My bill would require mandatory reporting of threats in schools to law enforcement. It's Senate Bill 789. It won't be posted until Tuesday, but what it calls for is anytime school personnel becomes aware of information that a reasonable person would feel constitutes a actual or implied threat of violence, there would need to be an immediate report to law enforcement, and they would need to report that threat to the police department with primary jurisdiction over whatever school, wherever that school is located. So my bill would also require school districts to implement policies and procedures to make sure this happens, and would need to train all of their staff too. So schools could take additional steps to address threats that they feel is appropriate. But this piece of it would be mandatory. If there was a threat of violence, law enforcement would need to be brought in immediately.
Is that not happening now?
Well, I mean, this is what's been reported that happened in Oxford, and we really had a great tragedy in northern Oakland County at that high school. So in my role as a legislator, I want to look at what are the steps we can take to help prevent a tragedy like this again in our state. So I want to collaborate with our schools and with law enforcement on this, and to have an open conversation about how do we best keep our kids safe. It's so important. And we do need the expertise of law enforcement to look at things from that angle and evaluate a threat and take appropriate actions to keep our kids and our teachers safe. It's so important. And another thing I'm working on in the Senate is additional funding for school safety grants, which would be available for school districts to apply for to make upgrades to their facility security. And this could include things like metal detectors, video cameras, special security locks for classroom doors, which those doors, those type of locks were in place in Oxford High School and really seemed to help keep students who got into the classroom safe.
Do you think all high schools, including Oxford, should have metal detectors moving forward?
I think that as a legislator, we need to make sure we appropriate the money for the schools to determine how best to use that money for their particular school.
When you talk about these threats, is that defined what the schools should consider a threat when notifying law enforcement?
It would be a credible threat, something that somebody said that would make you a reasonable person would feel constitutes either an actual or an implied threat of violence.
In terms of support in the Senate, how do you expect your fellow senators to respond to your bill?
Well, I wanted to get it in as soon as I could, but I do have bipartisan support. It's common sense. We do need to make sure that that there is a requirement for school personnel to contact their police department if there's a legitimate threat so they can be involved too. They look at it differently than others, and we need to have them evaluate it through their angle of law enforcement.
I see. Have you talked to law enforcement departments about what they think about this idea?
I've sent it to Sheriff Bouchard's office and to his staff. And what I'm hoping is that we can collaborate with our schools, with law enforcement, and we can fine-tune this bill. But I think we have heard from Sheriff Bouchard that he wishes that the Sheriff's Department would have been notified. And so it's based on those comments and from people that I've talked to. I've gone to a couple candlelight vigils, including the last one in Oxford. And the community support's been so strong, and we just need to make sure that we try to plug all the holes, that we need to make sure every child can get a good education in a safe environment. And I think this is one piece of the puzzle.
Is your sense that had this bill been in place, this requirement that this tragedy would have been avoided?
Rather than going backwards, I want to go forwards. We know that there has been some concerns that law enforcement was not brought in when there was a credible threat, and that we need to make sure as we go forward that we take every precaution within reason that we can.
One last question, Senator. In terms of this kind of a requirement, is there a penalty then for a school official not abiding?
I'm not sure about that yet. It just got written today, and I'll have to take a look. But it would be a law, and I'll have to see what we have as what would happen to someone that did not do that.
I see. Do we have any sense of how often school districts are not notifying law enforcement when these kinds of things happen, when there's, a serious threat against their school?
I don't have those statistics.
I see. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. It's just so important that we take action that we can to make sure that our schools are safer. And I think the way that it's written is that it could be anywhere from metal detectors, video cameras, special security locks, and that did appear to save a lot of lives at Oxford High School. They did have those special locks on the outside of the doors.
I see. You want that to be
inside.
On the inside. You want those pretty much at all the schools that they can get into? I
want the schools to determine how best they can use the extra money for security. Every school is different. There's one township in the UP here that has 7 adults that live in it. It's a much different situation from place to place, and they need to determine, based on their needs, how best to use the money as long as it's used for security needs.
And the second bill, what kind of funding, how much money are we talking about for that?
We're trying to find out right now. I talked to the appropriate chair today, and there will be substantial funding, he believes, available. And so I just want to make sure that they have enough money to make upgrades to schools that already have systems put in it, and for ones that don't have security, that they would have some money to put security in.